Hey friends, a quick warning. Dollars make you gay. So if you want to avoid the gay, you should totally give us your dollars. You can do so at patreon.com/the Gaytheist Manifesto. Tyler and Jeff did that recently, and thus have paid the gay away for at least another week. If you'd like to pay the gay away, head over to patreon.com/the Gaytheist Manifesto and consider a per episode donation to support the show. Also, quick note, the Pennsylvania State Atheist Humanist Convention is coming up October 13th through 15th. I'm going to be speaking there along with Abby Hafer, Gail Jordan, Alex Jules, Mark Nebo, and many, many more. For more info, check out atheistpa.org and come hang out with us. Your source for news, commentary, discussion, and debate at the intersection of the atheist movement and the LGBT rights movement. This is the Gaytheist Manifesto. Hello and welcome to the Gaytheist Manifesto. I am your host, Callie Wright, flying solo this week because unfortunately Ari isn't feeling well. So everyone send all your angry hate mail over their absence to aristillman4@gmail.com. I'm kidding. Don't do that. If you do that, I'm going to be really mad. Send all of your warm, loving, feel better messages, which they may not even like, to aristillman4@gmail.com. Our guest this week is Camille. Pronounce your last name for me.
Beredjick.
Beredjick. Okay, wasn't sure about the emphasis on the syllable.
I get it.
Well, my full first name is Calliope, so like I feel your pain. So Camille has written a book about the very thing that this show is literally about. So we are super excited to have this conversation. So why don't you just start by telling us about the book and what you're doing?
Sure. So thank you so much for having me on. The book is called Queer Disbelief. I've been working on it for about the past year. And like you said, it's really a look at the way that LGBT communities and atheist and secular communities overlap. And I mean that in sort of two different ways. So part of it is looking at the ways that these two groups have such similar issues that they face in society in terms of their relationship to religion. So when we talk about the First Amendment being sort of twisted or used in strange ways to benefit one religious group over another, that's an LGBT issue, and that's also an atheist issue. When we talk about things like same-sex couples being turned away because a baker or a florist doesn't want to participate in their wedding. That's an issue of religious discrimination and LGBT discrimination that atheists should care about. But there's also the perspective where you think about how people actually hold more than one identity, and we sometimes tend to think of people just as the one thing that we've gotten to know about them, or one particular facet of their identity, whether that's atheist, LGBTQ, what have you. But the reality is that we are all comprised of multiple identities, right? So when you look at the religious breakdown of the LGBT population, almost half of LGBT people are non-believers. So when atheists don't talk about LGBT issues in atheist work and secular organizing, they're inherently leaving out a really big chunk of their own demographic, and missing all of these opportunities for collaboration and for furthering other secular issues. So this book is really about how those two groups have a lot in common, but also a lot of differences. I don't want to falsely equate the current plight of LGBTQ civil rights with that of atheists, because it really is a different societal status right now. But they can, I think, really empathize with what the other has gone through and use that to work toward positive change.
Yeah, and that's a tough line to straddle for me, because there are so many times where I feel like I hear people in the atheist community talking about things like, well, there's still all laws on the books saying that atheists can't run for office. And I'm like, well, the Supreme Court made all of that go away a long time ago. But it's like, but it's still crap that they're still on the books. And I'm like, I get it. But if we're talking about real world, real life things that affect the quality of people's lives, maybe that's not the thing we want to focus on. And so in order to sort of trigger empathy and compassion, I do try to draw those parallels, just like you do, saying, well, hey, if you're an atheist, chances are what it's like for people to have unfair assumptions about you based on this one thing about you that really shouldn't mean anything else for who you are as a person, but it's assumed that it does, right? And so on a basic level, there's a similarity in the experience of a queer or trans person. You know, pretty much all of us at any level of privilege or lack thereof understands what it's like to have people make judgments about us and think things about us based on this one thing about us that may not even be the most important thing about us, you know? I always tell, like, most people who know me, know the show and the activism and stuff that we do, like, I am the trans atheist podcaster, right? But like, I want desperately for people to know that's the activism that I do. But to be honest, I think it's more fun to talk about Star Trek.
Exactly.
but yeah, it's a tough line to straddle, drawing that comparison and saying there's similarities here without feeding into the, you know, and I've seen people make the claim like, well, atheists are the most discriminated against group ever. And I'm like, and it's like, you know, you're on one hand, you're like, yeah, that's a thing, but like, you gotta dial it down a little bit. So yeah, that's a tough line to straddle. And, my next question is, how in the hell did we not know each other already?
That's a big surprise to me as well. I'm really glad that this was a moment for us to fix that grave issue, but I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, like I went and I looked at your YouTube channel and it's good stuff. I went and read your blog and it's good stuff. And it's like you blog and YouTube about the same stuff that I podcast about. And it just blows my mind that I've been doing this for almost 3 years now and we haven't connected at some point. So, yeah, so we have now. This is good stuff. And so, of course, I'm guessing that if you're writing a book about it, it's somehow informed by your own experiences. And on your site, you use the phrase you're being a closeted queer kid with 2 religions and no real beliefs. And that's really intriguing to me. So talk to me about that.
Sure. So there's so many coming out stories overlapping here at once, right? So growing up, my mom was raised Catholic and my dad was raised Jewish. So I was not baptized. I didn't have a proper bat mitzvah. I grew up doing Christmas and Hanukkah and Easter and Passover and sort of the TLDR version of every holiday. So we put up a Christmas tree and lit the menorah, but like I didn't really go to church. I didn't go to shul. I didn't do any of the really deep belief laden portions of those religions.
All of the presents from all of those things.
I got all of the presents. I'm not gonna lie.
That's awesome.
To be fair, I don't know what a normal Christian kid gets for normal Christmas. Right. So there's a chance that my parents tempered that appropriately and I didn't get all of like a normal kid's Christmas presents because I got some Hanukkah presents. But yeah, so there's all of that. But anyway, so because I had those sort of mixed forces in my head, and I'm very lucky to have a younger brother who also like thinks through all these things really critically with me. So growing up, we were like, well, where the hell do we fit in? And it was actually, I write about this a little bit in the book. When I started middle school, my closest group of friends was very religious, very Christian. And I thought, okay, so maybe, you know, if the people that I want to hang out with, if that's the kind of thing that they're into, maybe I'll be into it also. So one of my friends, I had been like sort of learning about Christianity from her, and her family bought me this Bible that was like geared towards teenagers that I could sort of learn from to see if it was for me. And it was a cool, it was a teen-focused Bible that had like fancy colors in the pages, and it was supposed to be like appealing to a younger crowd.
Yeah, like Nike swoosh symbols everywhere and all that. Like I had the younger kids one that was it was like the illustrated Bible. It was like a comic book of the Bible. It was awesome.
Yeah, this was the teen one, so there were like words spelled with Z's and stuff. You know the genre,
right?
So in that Bible, there were little like sections at the end, and then the footnotes and things that were like the life lessons that a teenager could learn. So one of the things it pulled out was like, the big lesson here is that like a Christian should never marry a non-Christian person because it will never work out.
Whoops.
And I was, and I was 12 or 13 and I was like, oh my God, like, does this mean that this God that all my friends believe in, this book that they read, should I not exist? Is my parents' marriage sinful? Like, should I not be here? And I talked through it with my parents and everything. And at this point, I didn't really even know that I was queer. Like, I had an inkling throughout middle school, but I really wasn't comfortable enough with the idea to come out to myself, let alone to everyone else, until the end of high school. And then I actually went back because I didn't really even look up that stuff in this cool teen Bible because I didn't know it applied to me yet. And when I went back and looked in it, it had even harsher things to say than just, don't do this. It was very hard and fast about that not being okay. So I had all these sort of mixed messages about like, well, my friends are really nice people and they love me and I think they'd be accepting, if I ever came out to them. And also I enjoy Christmas and Hanukkah and all of that, but I don't really believe in any of it. And I'm trying to get myself excited about this scripture that is sending fundamental messages about the validity of my existence. And after a while, it all sort of fizzled, and I realized that the belief just wasn't there, and I didn't need to work too hard to try to find it to be okay. So from then on, since college or so, I've just made peace with the fact that like the things that I do with my family around holiday times are just sort of traditions that we do culturally and family wise, and that I don't have strong beliefs to back them, and I'm okay with that finally.
And I mean, is that are your parents cool with that? Was that a struggle? Like,
my parents are very cool with it. So neither of them ever really pushed any kind of religion on my brother and I, which I'm very grateful for. And they're also not extremely strong, like practicing in either of their religions. Like my mom goes to church on Christmas and Easter, basically. My dad doesn't really ever go to shul. My dad does not keep kosher or anything. Like, I think, and when I talked to them, when I had this sort of crisis of faith as a 12-year-old, I talked to them and said, like, how did you make this work? And they said, like, we talked about it. We both believed in God. That was enough for us. Like, the details didn't matter, which sent me a pretty strong message about how, like, all right, it's okay if, this story has a different ending in your book versus your book, or like if you are okay with this one, but not that one. Like, it's all right for people to have the nuances different as long as they can either agree on one big principle or agree to disagree and just have that not be a core part of their relationship or marriage. So they were generally okay with that, which was great.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's really funny that our atheist stories are similar too, because it was like, it was my grandma was Christian, so I was Christian, and then like I really looked into it and I'm like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. And like that's my entire atheist journey. Like the TLDR version thing was not really a struggle for me.
Yep.
So I'm curious about the story of how this book came about. I mean, you're a blogger, and that's one thing. And like I imagine most people who blog have probably at least sort of in passing thought like, oh, maybe I should write a book at one time or another. But like, obviously sitting down in front of a computer and writing a couple of 100 words or 1,000 words or so for a blog and writing a book are two like utterly and completely different things. So like, I mean, was that scary? Was it like were you like super motivated? Like, tell me that whole story.
Extremely both. So the book was a combined brainchild between me and Hemant Mehta, who reached out to you. So I had been writing for Hemant's site for Friendly Atheist for close to 5 years now, and LGBT issues were always my beat for him. And I always wrote about how, like, I don't know, it was a little bit of a struggle sometimes saying explicitly why LGBT issues mattered on an atheist site, because there's all of these parallels that we can talk about with religious discrimination and the overlaps in communities and all of that. But the stories were never outright about atheism and LGBT people, at least very rarely. It was like, let's talk about this very homophobic thing that this church group did, and atheists should be mad about that, or yay, these progressive Christians did something right, so atheists should be happy about that. It was very rare that there were stories that were like active collaborations. And so as, Hemant and I had been working together for a while, we said, why don't we explore this in a little bit more depth and put together sort of like all of these different ideas that I had been exploring and writing for his site. And I've been like a writer of various sorts, since I was a kid. I've always wanted to write books. It's always actually been sort of my career endgame. So I'm hoping this is the first of many. But this is definitely not what I thought like my very first book project would be, because writing about like atheism and religion sort of just like a friend of mine like read Hemant's site and said that he thought that we would work well together and that I'd be a good fit for it. And it actually just worked out magically from there. So I never was super, super fired up originally about writing about atheism or about religion. But then in writing for Friendly Atheist, I realized how much there is to actually say about this issue and how fascinating all of these stories are. And you meet so many cool people through it. So it really was like, it was definitely overwhelming and a struggle in a lot of ways, because writing is always a bit of a struggle, but super exciting and I think very humbling to be able to talk to people from so many backgrounds and be given sort of the responsibility of sharing their story and folding it into this larger story of like how our groups work together. So it's been a process.
Right. And I'll tell you something that I struggle with, and I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this. And so, doing this activism, at this specific intersection of, atheist issues and LGBT issues, I have run into so much in certain corners of the atheist community that just kind of makes me want to stop. Like, it just makes me not want to care about atheism anymore because, in my mind, in this is my personal experience, and I fully admit that this is, that's a bias of mine. But I have run into so much that just makes me feel like I would rather go work with the local progressive Christian group than deal with some of the people in the atheist community that I've run across. Like, people are openly racist, openly anti-queer, openly anti-trans, or antagonistic at least, or completely unwilling to confront privilege and that kind of stuff. And, I've run into so much of that I have struggled a lot with it. I mean, this podcast has almost ended like 4 times at this point. Like, I just want to go talk about LGBT stuff. I'm done with atheism, Yeah. But, I keep coming back to the fact that it's not necessarily about the people, it's about the work, right? And the people that we do it for. And so I'm curious, have you had those kinds of experiences? Has that been a struggle, or is it something that just makes enough sense to you that that you're just trucking along?
Oh, it's definitely been a struggle. And I mean, I think I came across a lot of that in researching for this book, both in terms of like what I was seeing other people say, but also in terms of what the folks that I spoke to had seen of the atheist community. And like, I'm not gonna, like, I won't say too much that's also in the book, but like there was one woman who I spoke to who's an atheist. She's queer. She's a white woman who's partnered to a black woman. And she talked about how like atheism was a thing that was important to her, but that she had seen sort of exactly what you just said, just a lot of like racism and misogyny and privilege overflowing that some atheists, not all atheists, but some atheists were really unwilling to confront. And a lot of folks said that, whether it was led by like some of the views of the most prominent atheists in pop culture or stereotypes about atheists that like, I don't know, not necessarily like that, but manifest and come true or something, but that like there were subsets who clung very, very dearly to like what an atheist should look like. And here's how you must be an atheist if you're gonna have this label. So I've definitely seen that as an issue, and I totally hear what you mean about sometimes wanting to say like, I don't want to do this anymore. Let's just focus on the queer stuff. But like you said, I think you have to really think about like how many different groups really do fall under this larger umbrella, and how maybe someone doesn't identify as an atheist using that word, but their beliefs and their worldviews and principles are the same as somebody else who does use the word atheist. And, there's so many issues, whether they're political, social, something else, that can apply in a lot of different ways that like you have to really, I don't know, not overlook the egregious like privilege things that are happening and coming out of those circles, but actually sort of challenge them and say like, what are the things that make you say that, and why are those not productive, and how could you instead like use that fire that you have for atheism and perhaps like use it for good toward another group. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how much sense it makes, but all that to say that, like, yes, I hear you and I empathize.
Yeah. Well, and that's, that's why I'm still here too, because, I get mad, I get frustrated, I get disappointed when, we find out there's one more prominent atheist who's a shitbag. Like, I'm just like, God, what am I doing? And like, some of these folks are people who used to be my heroes, and I mean, I could go on and on about, heroes and why it's a bad idea to have heroes in the first place. But I thought highly of these people, and it's really disheartening. But then, I keep thinking about like, well, why do we do what we do in the first place? Right. It's not because of the famous atheists. It's not because of, I have, 2,000 people listening to my podcast instead of 3,000, or instead of 200 people listening to my podcast, right? It's about the fact that we see these things are a problem and we decide we want to do something about it. And, there's a legit discussion to be had about strategies. Maybe I start talking about secularism instead of atheism, because that word has less of a stigma, which is, obviously people are going to push back against that. When Hemet sent me the email, I was kind of still in one of those like fugue states, like do I even want to keep doing this? And I'm like, God, well, here's somebody who's like barreling full on, like head on into it, writing a book. I mean, I do a podcast every week. I talk into a microphone for an hour and then spend a few hours editing, but like, you're writing a book. So I'm like, and that's it's a good reminder to me of the reasons that I started doing this in the first place, and the reasons why we continue to do it, right? It's for the people that are in our email inboxes saying that, this is their life experience, and that something that we did or said or wrote or this video we recorded meant something to them. And that's what I have to keep reminding myself of more and more, more and more often to keep going. I'm curious, obviously I don't want you to give the entire book away or anything, but is there one particular story for the book that stands out to you as one that was like, whoa, this is a big deal, or something that you maybe didn't expect?
Oh, goodness. I don't want to say about like what I didn't expect, because I really didn't know what to expect. When you talk about something that is as big as like what you believe and who you love, I feel like those are two of the most defining things about us as we move through the world. And so when you ask a person what their experience is, I mean, it's sort of a cliche, but like no two are alike in any way. And it's not a secret that like progressive people of faith exist. I know that there's always going to be groups, or not necessarily groups, like there's always going to be a reaction of like, what, like you can be gay and be a Christian, or you can be trans and be Muslim. And like, yes, you can. And those stories exist. And there are people who are just like hungry to share those experiences. And really, honestly, it's a very generous thing to do, to sort of put your life out there as sort of an example of like, here's something that I'm going to say that I'm going to put into the world to hopefully make something better. So I don't know about things that like broke my expectations, but I know a lot of the progressive folks of faith who I spoke to were just so open and like, I don't know, brilliantly thoughtful about how they had come to understand their dual identities. There was somebody I spoke to, one of the earlier interviews in the book, about somebody who had been very religious for a long time and who was gay and thought, worked so hard to try to figure out how he could change his faith group from the inside out, and eventually just realized like, what, I can't actually do this. This isn't something that's going to happen with one person, and my health and my wellness needs to come first. And I think for a lot of people, that's ultimately what it comes down to, is like, how much of yourself can you give? And are you, what is the way that you want to go about practicing belief or non-belief in the context of your LGBT identity? Are you trying to change things? Are you trying to like, I don't know, are you just there to keep up with expectations that were set of you when you were young? What does this mean to you personally? There's so many different reasons for people to engage around faith, around any kind of community. And so overall, I was really honored that people were able to share so much of that with me, but also like all of the atheists who I talked to who were of a very similar mind to me, which is like, I can't always articulate why atheists should care about LGBT people, but yes, they should. And here's why. And like, right. I think the general overarching theme for so many of the people that I talked to, and also that was the perspective that I went in here, was like, no, like being an atheist, like ascribing to that label doesn't inherently mean, I support LGBT rights the way that like I'm a liberal might be, or I'm this, or I'm that. But there are just so many ways that it makes perfect sense that it's almost like you actually would need to explain yourself more if you don't. Like you're sort of, it's more logical even to say I'm an atheist who's not into LGBT rights. And I have so many people who just had so many reasons for why the relationship between those two makes such perfect sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the whole contingent of people who are like, well, atheism should be about atheism. And, I even saw somebody who, well, I won't say who, but somebody who's relatively known. I mean, they actually said something. This isn't a verbatim quote, but it was something along the lines of like, well, they have their own conventions and gatherings. Why can't we just have ours?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like swing and a miss, fella, because the way that I see it, there are two reasons to care about the conversation surrounding religion, right? If you're a person who just doesn't have one, okay. But if you're a person who actively cares about religion or specifically lack thereof, or, secularism and fighting religious belief, as I see it, there are only two reasons to do that. One, because you enjoy the intellectual exercise, which I don't mean to say that that's a bad thing, because intellectual exercise is awesome. And the other reason is because you care about the harm that comes from religion, right? And if you're honest about like just being the first kind, like, okay, it doesn't make you a bad person. We may not find a lot to work together on. That's fine. But I mean, if you're the second kind, which most people I meet who are atheists at least claim to be the second kind, how can we not take that baby step further and address the specific ways in which religion harms people, right? And there are a myriad of ways to do it. And if LGBT stuff isn't your niche, cool. Like I'm all right with that. But I mean, pseudoscience, sexual orientation, gender identity, the leaving of religion in the first place, like there are any number of ways, and it seems that people are unwilling to address even a little bit further than saying like, yeah, well, like religion's not good because people get hurt. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, tell me what you know about how it hurts people and who specifically it hurts. And if that's a thing you care about, like, why aren't you into like, okay, cool. So what can we do to stop this from happening? What can we do to stop shaming women for wearing skimpy clothes or being promiscuous? What can we do to stop people from feeling unwelcome because they're gay or because they're trans? Like, I don't understand how one doesn't automatically lead to the other. And maybe I do. Like, it's like the P word, right? Privilege, I think. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I want to go back to something you said earlier, because you, what I was kind of alluding to was, the question of if there were any stories that surprised you, like things that you didn't expect and things you didn't know. And, I find that when I talk to people, because I'm working on another project, I had to pull it off the internet because I had to change the name for reasons that I'm not allowed to talk about, which is super, super vague booking. But I go and I kind of do what it sounds like you did for the book. Like I just go around and interview people and say, tell me your story. Right. And I've heard a couple of stories that were like, wow, it's just so far outside of my experience. I'm really surprised by that. And then later on, as I'm thinking about it, I think I may be kind of a bad person for being surprised by this. And that's hyperbole, maybe. For example, I talked to a minister who is trans, and I was straight up with her. The reason that I was interested in her story is because a lot of people leave religion after they come out as queer or trans, because generally speaking, those communities aren't necessarily welcoming, right? I know tons of people that's happened to. What I know very few of are people who eventually come back and become members of the clergy. Like, that's really interesting to me. But, as I'm sitting there listening to her talking and her telling me her story, I'm thinking to myself, like, maybe it's a sign of my own privilege. It's a sign of my own lack of ability to consider the experiences of others, that's surprising to me. Because, for a person who truly believes, if you have the emotional endurance, I guess is the right word, to take that on and all the challenges that it comes with. I mean, when you think about it, it kind of makes perfect sense for somebody to do that. So, I don't know if there's a question in there, but I was just curious. I was thinking through that. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that whole general concept.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because I wrote for Hammond's blog for a really long time, like I said, and so many of the articles were about like, this is, a lesbian who was a teacher at a Christian school who got fired and it was legal based on the state that she was in. Or like, this couple wanted to get married at their church and they weren't allowed to, or somebody had a baby at this hospital and they were turned away because their doctor was religious. And the comment section, you know, you're not supposed to read the comments, but
God, yeah.
for some reason I did. And there were so many folks who were like, well, there's an easy answer to this, like, just leave. You know, when there were stories about like I don't remember the school, but like trying to get a GSA started at a religious school or facing some kind of LGBT discrimination at a religious school, people were like, well, duh, why don't you just leave and go to a different school, or just join a different faith, or just leave a different, you know, like leave your religion entirely. And I think when you say that, like, there's definitely an element of privilege to it, just at the very sheer level of like super expensive to move. It's expensive to like move communities if that's what you're trying to do. It's expensive to leave a school. It's really difficult to uproot from your family and your community if you've been somewhere for a long time. But also, I think that's really ignorant of like the very deep emotional investment that people put into their faith. And again, I'm saying this as somebody who does not have that commitment, right? So I can't even speak, you know, completely accurately about what that connection is like. But from the people I talked to who that was their experience, you know, I talked to a couple of people who were from more conservative religions who said that, you know, I know that this is not a perfect group to come from, but like, it's mine and I love it, and here's how I'm making it work for me, and perhaps here's how I'm trying to change things or make things better for other people who come from my experience. So I don't know, I think that like privilege is definitely a part of it. And there's also, I think, for those of us who haven't had that same experience, we think that the easy answer is like, well, just go, just stop doing it. But that's not always a behavior change. That can require an identity change, which is a greater ask of somebody. You can't say, you know, eliminate the adults who raised you and the kids that you grew up with and all the lessons that you learned, because I think you can be harmed by your faith and also take some good out of it, if that makes sense. And again, like, speaking as someone who like didn't, you know, get anything really from religion growing up, but like, you can be taught good principles from the same person who speaks against your existence in their next breath, you know, which is, I think, where a big part of the conflict comes from is like, oh, this person was so nice and said so many good things and taught me so much good about the world until they brought up this thing about gay people, and then everything changed. And it's really hard. Like, in any relationship, you don't want to throw away all the good stuff because of the bad stuff, but people have to really make that sacrifice or make that decision and figure out like, what is worth it for me, and what is the thing that's going to keep me the happiest and healthiest. And I think that's a different journey for every person, and that it's not up to anybody else to decide the right way to do it for somebody else.
Gosh, it's almost as if this is like kind of complicated and not really simple or black and white. It's weird. Weird how that stuff happens. Well, and I think about that too because when I see people say that, and to be honest, I have those impulses myself. Like, it's, you know, they always say, the first thing you think is how you're programmed. The second thing you think is who you really are. And, you know, the first thing that I think sometimes when I hear stories like that is like, well, why are you there? You know what I mean? Like, you know, your God hates you according to your Bible. You know what I mean? But then, you know, I think about my own struggles with the way that things have been turning out in the atheist community lately. And, you know, if I was saying that to someone who had zero emotional investment in that community, their response might be, well, just leave.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but some of the most meaningful relationships that I have in my life have come from this community. Some of the best memories and experiences, you know, traveling and speaking at conferences and getting to know people and stuff. Like, some of the best stuff that's ever happened to me in my life has happened to me because of this community. And I can't forget all of that stuff, because right now some of it kind of sucks, you know? And I think, and again, you know, when we're talking about things that go together, like LGBT activism and atheist activism, and drawing comparisons between the two, I think that's something that anyone should be able to empathize with, because I think it's probably a near universal human experience to have that. Like, I'm really invested in this community, and there's some of it that I don't like, and it might be to the point where I'm considering maybe it's not for me anymore, but that would mean giving all of this good stuff up. Like, if we describe it in those really nebulous terms, I think most people could come up with a story to be, oh yeah, there was this one time where that happened to me, you know. Sure. yeah, I don't know, more compassion, more thinking about the ways that these things affect other people. I think that's always a good thing. Well, so obviously you're here because you're writing a book. So, and you're doing a Kickstarter for the book. So, so tell us about that. Tell us where we can find it.
Yes, so you can find it. It actually just got featured as a Kickstarter project we love, which we're super excited about. So if you search the term Queer Disbelief on Kickstarter, you should be able to find it that way. The full, the part that comes after the slash on Kickstarter is Queer Disbelief by Camille Beredjick, with hyphens in between. But I have a long name, so
we'll link it in the show notes.
You can link it in the thing. But yes, pre-orders are available on Kickstarter. And you can also get fun little extra things, like signed copies of Hemon's book and a shout out in the acknowledgements and Skype conversations with me and with Hemant. So there's all kinds of things there.
Awesome stuff. And if people want to find out more about you, what you do, your blog, your YouTube channel, where can we go?
You can go to, my Twitter is cberedjick, CBEREDJICK. And then my blog is gayrights.org. And rights is spelled like handwriting, WRITES.
Can I make a confession to you?
Yeah.
I did not get the wordplay until you said that just now.
Aww.
Like since we emailed back and forth for this interview, I've looked at your site a bunch of times, just like read stuff you're writing, watch your videos, just research for the interview, and I'm all about wordplay, right? Like that's who I am as a person. Anybody who listens to like dad jokes, my favorite thing in the world. Totally did not get that play on words until just now, and I feel like a terrible person. So that's something about me.
You are not at all. One of my best Tumblr friends didn't get it for like 2 years after following me on Tumblr. So I think it's because it's the W. It throws you off.
Right.
Don't think of it that way. You're very much not alone.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. That, my friends, is going to do it for this episode of the Gaytheist Manifesto. You can find the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto. You can email us at thegaytheistmanifesto@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Gaytheist Callie. You can find the show on Twitter at The Gaytheist. And we're all missing the Ari outro, aristillman4@gmail.com for your hate mail. If you want to support the show and the activism we do, you can head to patreon.com/The Gaytheist Manifesto and make a per episode donation as little as $1 per episode. And if you can't do that, you can still head over to iTunes, give us a 5-star review, helps us get moved up in the ratings, helps us get heard by more people. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is the Gaytheist Manifesto.